Welcome to Ignatius Press Off the Shelf. We can discuss John Henry Newman, A Life Sacrifice by Ida Friederike Görres. And we are on, I'm correct this time, we're on chapter 3 of part 1, Newman's Religious and Human Character in Letters and Sketches. And I want to interject before I turn it over to you, Joseph and Vivian, that I've read several works by Newman over the years. He's a wonderful writer and beautiful prose, tremendous psychologist, really, of the human heart. Uh, but those are his public, official, published writings. Uh, Ida Görres makes a lot of use of his letters to people.
Yes.
And you see a little different side. You see the personal interior side, the struggle he's going through, which is why she calls this a life sacrifice. So I found this very enlightening to get these various quotes from Newman's letters, which unless you're just a Newman scholar or a Newman aficionado, you're never going to see.
Yes.
Very helpful.
I agree.
Who's in charge? Vivian or
No, Joseph.
Joseph? Okay, Joseph.
Well, the first thing I have highlighted is the top of page 71. So if anybody wants to comment prior to that, then I'm going to cede the chair.
Go on.
Okay, so 3 lines down on page 71.
Yep.
Newman's life is tragic, and his Christian character, maybe say the character of a saint, ? Came into being through bearing this tragedy. Well, I'll then read the next paragraph. It's connected. The subject of this drama can be roughly described as follows: an extraordinary nature with Goethe-like faculties that seems destined for victory and conquering and encountering and experiencing the world is thwarted by spirit and grace. Overcoming the world has to be accomplished by way of renunciation, and precisely in this rupture, it is in the fate of non-fulfillment that his nature attains its distinctly human and Christian perfection. Now, this is very important because I think this is also really stating Ida Friederike Görres's thesis, shall we say, right? This is the life sacrificed. So we need to get this right. But there's a paradox there, which I think is delightful. But also I think it's very intriguing, because the usual definition of a tragedy is, someone who has noble character who basically falls because of a fatal flaw, a fatal weakness, right? Now, what's being suggested here is that Newman, not his fall, but his being thwarted, is a consequence of his, not his weakness, but his strength, all right? So the only way that I think this can make, well, there probably are other ways, but the way this makes sense as far as I see it is that this strength is itself a weakness. In other words, having all of these wonderful talents that we can put to the gift of the world are things that very easily become the things that destroy us and corrupt us, because it allows us, it gives us the ability to become successful in a worldly sense, to have the world at our grasp and our fingertips, to domineer others. So these strengths are in fact a weakness, unless, right, there's a renunciation and a giving them away and saying, well, I'll use the gifts I have, but within the confines and constraints of what my humility demands, right? And so it's I think it's the temptation and tendency to pride that these worldly talents have, which is ironically and paradoxically the fatal flaw, potentially.
Joseph, I had underlined exactly the same sentences you had. And when I first saw this manuscript, we got it, A Life Sacrifice. To me, that was a dissonance, because reading Newman's, well, except for his Apologia, but you read the Earnings of the Fourth Century, you read the Grammar of Assent, these things, you have a sense of this serene, very accomplished, poetical, deeply, insightful person living a life of not pleasure, but a fairly comfortable life with his friends and so on. And I knew that he had to give up the Church of England and the Keble Fusey and his friends. But here you really see, precisely because of who he was and his sensitivity and his love, uh, how anguished he was. And so
Mhm.
that really, it was a life sacrifice.
It was. It was. And also we get this. I had heard that he suffered from melancholy, but I never really delved into what that meant. But on page 72, she talks about how, his furious pace of work without rest and breaks caused him nervous breakdowns several times. And, you know, uh, the first time at the age of 20, when the young student failed his exam after working 12 to 15 hours a day for 20 weeks. This breakdown had significant consequences. Newman gave up his second career and turned to theology. And that was another thing I didn't realize, was that he didn't start out on a theology track, that he started out initially. So this, what she describes, that he had the world as his oyster, so to speak, um, that this was taken from him because of this deeper nature he had. But then, even when he turns to theology and becomes this giant in the Church of England and the leader of this movement and so on, then he gives all that up. I mean, this man has just suffered one huge loss after another, and and but this being his way of bearing the cross of his Savior. I mean, it's, on one hand, it's in a way frighteningly encouraging.
It's a little bit uh, hmm, demeaning here. He gets this breakdown because he can't handle natural sciences, mineralogy, geology, chemistry, mathematics, and composition, all things Persian. So he has to turn to theology. I mean, oh, it's a lot easier to do theology. There's not much there. I mean,
And there's a line from his mother where if you're going to look at what the tragic fault is, Joseph, there's that line from his mother where she basically says, you know what your problem is? You're a perfectionist and you're too hard on yourself and you don't have any confidence. And, we know this personality type. They're extremely hardworking and diligent. They're lacking in confidence because they're perfectionists and their work never lives up to their own standard that they're applying to it. They're their own harshest critics, and they do suffer from misunderstanding and deep melancholy that no one else really understands. I mean, this is a type. And to have a man of such great potential be suffering from this sort of internal self destructive tendency, you can even call it, if you're always sabotaging your own success.
Yeah,
But
if I yeah, if I just one thing I want to say is we spent 72 there. I would go back to the bottom of 71 just because there's an aspect of Newman's character I don't want us to lose sight of, which
mhm.
is it's all about psychology, psychosis, angst, perfectionism. But 6 7 lines up from the bottom of page 71, from age 10 into his elder years, the violin is his delight and consolation. Beethoven was his great love. He liked to call him the gigantic nightingale, and still enthused the young confreres who played string quartets and trios with him in the oratory for his violin teacher from childhood. What came after Beethoven in music left him cold. So I want to keep that in our mind. This is a man who loves beauty, and not just loves beauty; he's a practitioner of it.
Mm.
Doesn't just listen. Unlike me, I can't play the violin or any other musical instrument. I love listening to it, but he plays the violin. He listens to the violin. He loves Beethoven. So ironic, by the way, Beethoven is very much a romantic and avant-garde when Newman's young. And then he doesn't have sympathy for anybody after Beethoven, which is a
Well,
little bit odd if that's true, because obviously there were some great composers in the 19th century that came
to
after
your
Beethoven.
point though, Joseph, about this two types of romantics, uh, based on people who know more about music than I do, far more. Uh, it was explained to me that Beethoven is really the end of the classical era, and that the romantics, even his own contemporaries who are going with the romantic trend now, that Beethoven really is almost in a class by himself, and it's not correct, properly speaking, to call him a romantic in the way the men who came after him were. That he actually was this end of the classical era, innovating it to a point that no one else had ever taken it. And so it's possible that for an actual musician like Newman to see the difference, something that was lost on me until it was explained to me like this.
Yeah, so I would argue, arguing with you worries me, arguing with Newman worries me even more, especially on something like music, which I'm not an expert. But but there's no doubt that Beethoven is a romantic in the sense that there's a great deal of his own personal passion in his music, which you don't see as much in what comes before it in Mozart, for instance, or Bach. The classical music is sort of it's striving towards mathematic objectivity in some sense, whereas Beethoven's very much let's just put the
Right.
emotion into it.
Right. And I'm not talking about the presence of the passion. What I'm talking about is the forms of the music. This was explained to me by a musician. The forms of the music. This is where he put Beethoven on this continuum, and these continuums, as we argued over when did the Renaissance start, these
Right.
continuums don't have hard beginnings and ends, it's a flow. But when this was explained to me, though, it now when I read it here, I'm like, oh, okay, that checks out with what this other person said.
Well, I'm blessed to have as one of my closest friends, Michael Kurek, who wrote The Sound of Music, not Sound of Music, The Sound of Beauty for Ignatius Press, and is an internationally acclaimed classical composer working on his Fourth Symphony at the moment. I'm going to ask him about Beethoven next time. Next time I meet
Yes,
him, I'm going to ask him
ask him
about
where
Beethoven.
he fits on this continuum and throw out
I'm going to, and
this
also
other
where he fits with vis-a-vis romanticism.
that came after him. The people who came after him who really took the romantic movement in that other direction. Anyway, I don't want to,
Well, I want
No, no,
to.
that was a tangent, and I may have called for it was
No, but
unnecessary.
since you brought it up, I want to my own. I'm not a musician, but I naturally was attracted, to certain kinds of music. And the three that always impressed me were Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. And you know, Lewis talked about himself being the last medieval man. I mean, I think Beethoven was kind of the last medieval musician in the sense that he had the structure, he had the form. I mean, it was like a Gothic cathedral for sure. And when you get into the real romantics, it becomes fluid, and you finally get to atonal type stuff. But he straddled both ends of the classical and romantic. In my amateur listening, you know, and I was happy to see this thing with Newman because yeah, I mean I like country music and things, but for me after Beethoven, it's
it's all downhill.
downhill. you know.
Yeah. And of course, the other thing I don't want to overemphasize the melancholy side of things when what's going to come up more and more to the fore here is that it is his devotion to the truth wherever it leads, and no matter what it costs for him to go there.
Yeah, this whole chapter that we're going to get to.
That becomes the striking feature of his life, right?
Passion
And
for the truth.
yes, and so you wouldn't want to get too bogged down in the psychology and lose. But that's what the
No,
next chapter is about.
that's why I mentioned playing the violin and loving
Yeah.
Beethoven because I think that the Ida Friederike Görres she's very philosophical, and this is very much a philosophical approach to Newman. And I'm amongst other things, I'm a biographer, and I want to know the whole human person. And the fact that when Newman's left alone with a few friends, he picks up his violin, I think is important.
Yes.
Again, page 74, about 8 lines down. He might have devoted more time to his garden and his love of growing plants than to his library. Somewhere, Newman left a very revealing sketch of, quote, the ideal of a happy life, end quote. A vivid picture of the existence of a wealthy bachelor in a cultivated English country house, surrounded by all the noble delights of mind and body. Even strawberry beds and a sunny wall for peaches are included.
Yeah.
I think that's important, right? We need to know who Newman is as a person, if we're going to know him in any depth.
That's right. That's right.
I have nothing else I want to comment until page 84, so I'm going to cede the floor so we can make as much progress as you like.
Okay. That image of an ideal happy life, I mean, he could not have been further from that up in Birmingham, the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and now his parishioners are all of these uncouth Irish workers. And I mean, really, the man, everything that he cherished was taken away. And yet, there he is up there playing the violin with his friends. You know, he had this ability to take these gems along with him, however much everything else was taken.
And I would say as well, as a mea culpa moment, as an Englishman here, like when I go on pilgrimage to England, I want to go to Our Lady of Walsingham, in the beautiful Norfolk countryside, or Lindisfarne off the in the Northumbrian coast. The very thought of going on a pilgrimage to Newman's Edgbaston, right? In Birmingham was a village before the Industrial Revolution. It's the second largest city in England. It's all concrete and ugly and horrible. And I avoid Birmingham like the plague. And if I ever go there again at all, Newman will be the only person that ever drags me there. If I ever do get on pilgrimage with Newman, but normally if I've designed pilgrimage, what Father Fessio and I have done too. Right, and the last thing that I would have done in my input on where we should go is Birmingham.
And
And
it was
unfortunately,
becoming that
that's
when
exactly where you need to go to go on a pilgrimage for St. John Henry Newman.
But they had a great Archbishop, Couvreville, who, as an English Archbishop, recently wrote a book on Nipper, which is wonderful. And they got the Maryvale Academy, that was one of the finest catechetical institutions in England. So, yeah,
Agree?
in the midst of the rubble, in the midst of the steel and concrete and so on, there's also a couple of flowers that got up through the asphalt.
yeah.
Amen. Amen.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Well, as I said, I have nothing to page 84, so I'm actually ceding the floor to either of you if you have things before that. So I'm cherry picking so we can move on, not getting
Yeah,
bogged down. But
I didn't
I
know,
don't want to leave things out that you think are gems.
except for what you've already commented. I didn't pick out many specific passages here. I got a kind of general idea of the whole chapter, but
Hmm.
maybe you have something before page 84.
Well, just this autobiographical quote of his own in the middle of page 83, the bottom of the second paragraph there. Yes, this is a quote from the character, his hero in Loss and Gain, which is an autobiographical novel that Newman wrote, but it gives you a sense of everything he lost. Yes, I give up home. I give up all who have ever known me, loved me, valued me, wished me well. I know well I am making myself a byword and an outcast. And like Father says, when you read his prose and his poetry, you don't get the impression at all of what
No.
of the pain that he was dealing with in his life. You just don't. Yeah.
And I would actually say here, as we're mentioning now, loss and gain, that people really want to get to know Newman. Because with the character of Charles Reading, which is very thinly veiled, John Henry Newman is basically fictionalizing his own journey to conversion. That because it's fiction and because he's not talking about in the first person, but through the third person fictional character, I would suggest that if you really want to know the real truth about Newman's intellectual journey, read that novel, because it might be fiction, but it's actually far closer to the truth than reading the Apologia, where he's making an argument, anywhere else we're going to read about Newman's conversion. That book, written, by the way, and published only 3 years after his conversion, so the whole thing is fresh in his mind as he writes it.
Very good advice.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Oh, so middle of page 84, at about the same time, the plan for a Catholic college in Oxford was being considered with Newman. Quote from Newman: "Personally, it would be as painful a step as I could be called upon to make. Oxford never can be to me what it was. It and I are severed. It would be like the dead visiting the dead. I should be a stranger in my dearest home. I look forward to it with great distress, and certainly would not contemplate it except under an imperative call of duty." I mean, first of all, that's beautiful prose, but that there's a great deal of Newman in that, Oxford was so important to him. The Oxford movement, it made him in many ways,
Hmm.
but also it rejected him. It cast him out. And so the Oxford that he knew and loved, because he crossed the threshold, right? I think it's even in War that says of conversion, that it is even in what it says of conversion, that conversion is like stepping across the chimney piece out of an absurd world where everything is a caricature into the real world that God made, and then being as the whole new adventure of discovering it. That's a paraphrase, but that's basically what War says. So this is what's happened, of course, with Newman. He's crossed this threshold. He's walked through a wardrobe, however you want to talk about it, right? And the Oxford that he loved is no longer there, because the Oxford he loved was the Oxford that he knew as an Anglican. He no longer belongs there, in both senses of the word, right? He's dead to it, and it is dead to him, right? The Oxford doesn't want him; he doesn't belong there, but neither does Oxford belong to him, because he's moved
Right.
beyond it. But still, of course, it's home in some sense. That's the melancholy part. So much of who he was, and therefore, because we are a continuum, right? Therefore, who he was is also who he is. He's now alienated from, exiled from, and that's that great cause of sadness, which is why it's painful to go back, right?
Right.
If the divorce was absolute, and I just treat that with contempt now, I can go back there as a missionary, and no, there's still so much of who he was and therefore who he is in the place which is now dead to him and which considers him to be dead.
And he'll never have in the Catholic Church the illustrious career that he was having at Oxford. That's not going to happen now ever again. And then he said, the biographer on page 85 says, in the middle of the page, Newman never got over the loss of his first most beloved community. He never got over the loss. It isn't simply the conversion and now that world is dead to him. It's much deeper than that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, yeah.
and following what you said, Joseph, I mean, we've experienced the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and you see these clips of Charlie Kirk when he goes to a university campus. Now, he never went to college except for 1 year, but you see the difference. I mean, Charlie Kirk was brilliant, no question about that. But he'd go to a hostile campus and say, "Prove me wrong," okay, and crowds would come. I mean, Newman could never do that. I mean, Newman was going to go to Oxford and say, "Look, prove me wrong. Now I know I got the truth now." No, he really felt the wrenching agony of having lost his friends, his past, his memories, his home, what he loved. He couldn't go now. I'm going to debate you folks and tell you where you're wrong. And we'll see that later. Why it takes him so long to actually
Leave.
to leave.
He's the one who had to leave if he's going to become a Catholic. He can't remain a minister in the church and a Oxford, whatever, a scholar, leaving the Anglican Church.
On page 88, the second new paragraph there. Yet it seems to us this strong tension between loneliness and friendship, which so determined Newman's life, is situated far deeper than just in a natural predisposition. It is situated in the secret of his vocation, which at the same time fulfilled and overrode his nature and his innermost core. Uh, this, the fact that he was so close to his friends, I mean, they had such a beautiful friendship. As Lewis says, two people facing the same goal, walking together. That's what Lewis did with these people. Uh, and yet to have to leave them, what loneliness to realize that, wait a minute, I'm starting to have doubts about what we share in common here. It must have been terrible.
And also that's connected to his vocation as a priest. So what you said there dovetails beautifully with the last thing I want to talk about in this chapter. Bottom paragraph, page 89. In Loss and Gain, he has Charles Reading say to his sister, quote, "But I am sure that did I give my heart to any creature, I should be withdrawing it from God." So this idea of priestly celibacy, that ultimately the priest has to be married to the church, has to give himself solely to Jesus Christ, That I think is a large part of this tension between and loneliness. That's a consequence of not being able to have friendships that naturally he is inclined to and would enjoy, but knows that that's going to be an obstacle for something which is much more important.
And the fact that he embraces clerical celibacy even before he becomes a Catholic, that he is already seen that the core of the priestly ministry in the church is a celibate relationship to God, to the church, to everybody else. That she says he was a truly chaste man, is the way the biographer puts it. This heart for God alone. The fact that he already had that in his core even before becoming a Catholic, to me, is really astonishing.
And especially because his two closest friends, Pusey and Keble, were also clerics, but were also married. They were married, both of them. For him to be part of that trio and come to himself the conclusion, no, I must be celibate.
And he had great esteem for those men and their marriages, that their marriages were truly fruitful Christian marriages in every way. And he admired them. For him to still have this understanding.
Yeah, one of them wasn't fruitful. They didn't have, one of them
they didn't have children for no fault of their
not
own.
Not fruitful in every way.
So, right, but they became fruitful in other ways.
That's
yes,
right.
Thank you for clarifying.
Good. I think that
we done now?
Is a nice conclusion of that chapter. We'll begin next session with chapter 4, Passion for the Truth. Thank you, everyone.